The hand that grabbed Dean Martin's arm wasn't shaking from cold. It was August in Las Vegas. 112 degrees outside, but the fingers digging into Dean's sleeve were trembling like a man who had just seen his own ghost. The hallway of the International Hotel stretched out in both directions, empty, clinical, bathed in the sterile glow of fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry insects. Dean had been walking toward the side exit, his loafers clicking against the marble floor, when a shadow separated itself from the wall. Elvis Presley, 34 years old, 30 million albums sold, the most famous man in the world. He didn't look like a king that night. He looked like a boy who had wandered too far from home and couldn't find his way back. His stage makeup had run down his cheeks in dark rivulets. Sweat plastered his black hair to his forehead. His white jumpsuit was soaked through, and his eyes were wild, searching, desperate. "Mr. Martin," Elvis whispered, "I need to ask you something. Something I can't ask anyone else." Dean didn't move. The cigarette between his lips had gone out. The glass of apple juice in his hand caught the fluorescent light and turned it gold. What Elvis said next, Dean Martin would carry for 26 years. He never repeated it. Not to Frank, not to Sammy, not even to his wife. Until one night in 1988, when the weight became too heavy to carry alone. August 10, 1969, International Hotel, Las Vegas, 11:47 p.m. The hallway temperature read 82 degrees. The air conditioning had failed 3 hours earlier. To understand why the king of rock and roll was trembling in a hallway, begging a crooner from Steubenville, Ohio for answers, you have to go back 13 years, to a small living room in Memphis, to a boy watching television. It was 1956. Elvis Aaron Presley was 21 years old, still living with his parents on Audubon Drive. His first album had just gone gold. Teenage girls were fainting at his concerts, but that night none of it mattered. Elvis sat on the worn sofa next to his mother Gladys, watching the Dean Martin show. Dean was singing "That's Amore." He had a glass in one hand, a cigarette in the other, and a half-smile that suggested he knew a secret the rest of the world didn't. He flubbed a lyric. The band kept playing. Dean shrugged, laughed, and made a joke about his ex-wife. Elvis didn't blink. "What are you looking at, son?" Gladys asked. "That man ain't trying, Mama. He's just breathing like it's nothing." That night, Elvis stood in front of his bathroom mirror and tried to copy Dean's half-smile. The way one corner of his mouth lifted while the other stayed perfectly still. It didn't work. Elvis's version looked forced, practiced, like a mask that never quite fit. Over the next 12 years, Elvis and Dean rose on parallel tracks. Dean conquered Las Vegas with a glass of apple juice and an attitude that suggested he'd rather be on a golf course. He didn't rehearse. He didn't worry. Elvis conquered the world, but the world demanded more from him. More energy, more performances, more proof that he deserved his crown. The difference between them was crystalline. Dean went on stage and became himself. Elvis went on stage and became Elvis. By 1967, the gap had become a canyon. Dean was the king of cool. Elvis was trapped in a Hollywood prison, 27 films in 8 years, each one worse than the last. His album sales had dropped 70%. The Beatles had invaded America. Elvis looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back. Then came the 1968 comeback special. NBC gave Elvis one last chance. Black leather instead of sequins, sweat, raw energy, 42 million viewers. The reviews were rapturous. The king has returned. But backstage, alone in his dressing room, Elvis stared at his reflection. Everyone is applauding. But who are they applauding? And then came Vegas. The air in the International Hotel that August night tasted like cigarette smoke, cheap perfume, and desperation. 2,000 people were packed into the showroom waiting for a resurrection. Elvis stood backstage, his hands trembling so badly he couldn't button his jumpsuit. 7 years since his last live performance. Colonel Parker's last words echoed in his skull. "One shot, son. You blow this, you're done." Elvis looked at himself in the mirror. The white jumpsuit wasn't iconic yet. It was just fabric, just another mask. What he saw reflected back wasn't the king of rock and roll. It was fear. Half a mile away at the Sands Hotel, Dean Martin was getting ready for his own show. He sat in his dressing room reading the newspaper. His manager asked if he wanted to run through the set list. "The songs know where to go," Dean said without looking up. "I just show up." At 8 p.m. the lights went down at the International Hotel. Elvis Presley walked into a spotlight that felt like a firing squad. "That's all right, Mama." His voice cracked on the first verse. The words he had sung 10,000 times suddenly vanished from his memory. 3 seconds of silence. 2,000 people held their breath. Elvis closed his eyes, found the melody somewhere in the darkness, and continued. The show ran 90 minutes. Standing ovation, screaming, weeping. Elvis stumbled backstage and vomited into a trash can. At the Sands, Dean's show had ended 20 minutes earlier. He sang "That's Amore" and deliberately mangled the Italian lyrics. The crowd laughed. He checked his watch mid-song and announced he was late for golf. After the show, Dean took a shortcut through the International Hotel. The hallway was empty. His loafers clicked against the marble. A door opened. Elvis emerged, still in his sweat-soaked jumpsuit. His bodyguards hung back. Elvis had ordered them to stay. He saw Dean and froze. For a moment neither man moved. Then Elvis walked forward. Each step seemed to shrink him. By the time he reached Dean, the most famous man in the world looked impossibly small. "Mr. Martin?" Dean stopped. Cigarette in his mouth. Apple juice in his hand. Elvis's hand reached out and grabbed Dean's arm. The fingers dug in like a drowning man clutching driftwood. "I need to ask you something." What came next would change both men in ways neither expected. Elvis's fingers tightened on Dean's sleeve. He was shaking. "Mr. Martin, how do you do it?" Dean's expression didn't change. "Do what, kid?" "Be real." Silence. The hallway stretched into infinity. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Elvis's eyes were wet. His makeup had streaked down his face. 30 million albums, and his lips trembled like a child's. "I just did a show," Elvis said. 2,000 people. Standing ovation. They screamed my name for 10 minutes. Dean waited, and I felt nothing. Elvis's voice broke. "Nothing, Mr. Martin. Like I wasn't even there. Like someone else was on that stage wearing my face." Dean took a slow drag on his cigarette. Exhaled a stream of blue smoke. "Kid, you go up there," Elvis cut him off. "You go up there and you're just you. No act. No character. Just Dean Martin." He swallowed hard. "I go up there and I'm playing Elvis. I've been playing Elvis for 13 years. And I don't even know who I am anymore." A drop of sweat rolled down Elvis's chin and splashed onto the marble floor. Dean looked at his glass of apple juice, then at Elvis, then at the glass again. 5 seconds passed. Maybe 6. Dean studied Elvis's face, the trembling lips, the desperate eyes, and saw something he hadn't expected. He saw himself. Steubenville, 1937. A 16-year-old kid staring into a cracked mirror, wondering if he'd ever be anything more than a steelworker's son. "You want the truth, kid?" Elvis nodded. Dean's hand came up and rested on Elvis's shoulder. Light, almost paternal, and then, in a whisper barely above a breath, "I don't know who I am either. Difference is, I stopped looking." Elvis's knees buckled slightly. He caught himself against the wall. "You're the first person," he whispered, "who ever said that to me. Everyone else pretends they have it figured out." Elvis went rigid. "But you seem so." "Seem." Dean's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. But his eyes weren't smiling. "That's the whole trick, kid. Seem." He let the word hang in the air. "Everyone wears a mask," Dean continued. "You, me, Frank, Sammy, everyone. Then what's the difference?" Elvis's voice was raw. "Between you and me." Dean took a step back, dropped his cigarette to the marble floor, ground it out with his heel. "I learned to love the mask. You're still fighting it." 47 seconds. That's how long the entire exchange lasted. Elvis's hand slowly released Dean's sleeve. "Love it," Elvis repeated. "How?" Dean didn't answer. He just raised his glass of apple juice, tilted it slightly, so the liquid caught the light. "It's not whiskey, kid. It wasn't ever whiskey." Dean's hand trembled. "Just once. Just barely." But Elvis saw it. "Everyone assumes," Dean added quietly. "I let them. That's part of the trick too." Somewhere down the hallway, an elevator bell chimed. The air conditioning shuddered back to life, and the two most famous entertainers in America stood in silence, stripped of everything but the truth. And he started walking. He didn't look back. Over the next 8 years, Elvis Presley and Dean Martin would cross paths exactly 4 times. Each time they exchanged the same look. The look of two men who knew each other's secret. Las Vegas. Dean came to see Elvis's show at the International Hotel. Front row. Elvis spotted him during Suspicious Minds and gave a small nod. After the show, backstage, Elvis's dressing room was a carnival of excess. Flowers, telegrams, gold records on every wall. Elvis ignored all of it. His eyes were fixed on Dean. "I've been practicing," Elvis said. "Loving the mask." Dean studied him. "I can tell. You're smiling different." Elvis laughed. For the first time since that hallway, it sounded genuine. "Still feels like a lie. Give it time, kid. Give it time." The Aloha from Hawaii concert. 1.5 billion viewers across 40 countries watched Elvis perform in that white jumpsuit, cape flowing behind him like wings. Dean watched from his living room in Beverly Hills. Jean sat beside him. On screen, Elvis was magnificent, powerful, everything a king should be. But Dean noticed something the cameras couldn't capture. The eyes. Elvis's eyes were still searching. Dean turned to his wife. "Kid still looking. Looking for what?" Dean didn't answer. 1975. The last phone call. Dean reached for the receiver, knocking his watch off the nightstand. The green glow of the clock radio painted the ceiling in sick light. 3:17 a.m. "Mr. Martin?" In the background, Dean could hear a television playing. Canned laughter from some late-night rerun. And something else. A faint rattle. Pills in a bottle. The voice was hoarse, exhausted, broken. "I can't do it anymore." Elvis's voice came from somewhere far away. "The mask. I can't even put it on anymore, it's too heavy." Silence stretched between them. "Then take it off," Dean said. "I can't. I tried. It won't come off." A choked sound. "The mask isn't on my face anymore, Mr. Martin." His voice dropped to a whisper. "It became my face." Dean's chest tightened. "Kid, maybe you should." Click. The line went dead. Dean held the receiver for a long time. The dial tone hummed like a flatline. Jean stirred beside him. "Who was that?" Dean placed the phone back in its cradle. "Wrong number," he said. Another mask. Another lie. Another lie. He walked to the window and stared at the Las Vegas lights in the distance. Somewhere out there a kid was drowning, and Dean had just handed him an anchor instead of a rope. August 16, 1977. Elvis Aaron Presley was found dead on his bathroom floor at Graceland. He was 42 years old. Dean Martin was in Las Vegas that night. The Sands Hotel. Same stage, same lights. 10 minutes before showtime, his manager burst through the door. "Dean, Elvis, he's dead." The cigarette slipped from Dean's fingers. It hit the carpet and kept burning. His manager stomped it out. "Heart attack," the manager continued. "Bathroom floor. 42 years old. They found him at 2:30. Dean didn't move. 5 seconds. 10. Then so quiet that no one else could hear. Kid finally took off the mask. Dean walked to his dressing room mirror, studied his own reflection. 70 years old. Still wearing the same mask. Still breathing. He wondered if that made him lucky or just slower at dying. That night, in the middle of his set, Dean Martin did something he hadn't done before. Something he wouldn't do again. He sang "Can't Help Falling in Love," Elvis's song. The audience was stunned. Then they applauded. Then they wept. Dean never explained why. He didn't mention Elvis's name. He just finished the song, took a sip of his apple juice, and moved on. But those who knew him saw something crack behind his eyes. Years later, Jerry Schilling, one of Elvis's closest friends, gave an interview. Elvis talked about Dean Martin all the time after that Vegas night. He'd say, "That man knows something. Something he ain't telling." Jerry paused. One time in 1976, on the tour bus, Elvis turned to me and said, "Jerry, Dean Martin is the most honest liar I ever met." I didn't understand what he meant, not until I saw Dean's interview in '88. By 1988, the secret seemed buried. Elvis had been dead for 11 years. Dean had never spoken a word about that hallway to anyone. The trembling hand, the confession, the 47 seconds, all of it seemed destined to vanish, or so everyone thought. But secrets have weight, and some secrets become too heavy to carry alone. In 1988, Dean Martin sat down for what would be one of his last television interviews. He was 71 years old. His face was lined, his hair had gone silver, but his eyes were still sharp. The interview was routine, the usual questions. Dean answered them all with practiced ease. Then the interviewer asked a question no one expected. "Mr. Martin, did you meet Elvis Presley?" Dean's expression shifted. Subtle, a flicker that most viewers wouldn't catch, but it was there. "Once," Dean said, "one night in Vegas, 69. What was he like?" Dean was quiet for a long time. "Lost," he finally said. "Most famous man in the world, and completely lost." The interviewer leaned forward. "Is there anything else you remember about that night?" Dean's gaze drifted somewhere beyond the camera. "He asked me something that night, in a hallway. Just the two of us." "What did he ask?" Dean's jaw tightened. "He asked me how it felt to be real." Silence. "What did you tell him?" Dean's eyes glistened. For the first time anyone could remember, Dean Martin looked vulnerable, but not broken, just human. "I told him I didn't know, and that's the only honest thing I said to that kid." The interviewer tried to continue, but something in Dean's face stopped him. "I wish," Dean said, his voice cracking, "I'd had a better answer. Maybe things would have been different." The interview ended there. In that moment, the world glimpsed something it hadn't seen before. Dean Martin's mask had cracked, just enough to reveal that he had been carrying the same emptiness Elvis had. Maybe Dean was just as lost as Elvis. Maybe none of us are really real. Maybe Dean's genius was learning to stop looking. Maybe Elvis's tragedy was that he couldn't. Two men, two masks, the same void underneath. One learned to love the mask and lived to 78. One fought the mask and died at 42. 47 seconds, the time they spent in that hallway. 8 years, how long Elvis survived after. 11 years, how long Dean stayed silent. 1 interview, when the truth finally emerged. 0, the number of times either of them found the answer. We all wear masks, every single one of us. We all have 3 o'clock in the morning moments where we look in the mirror and don't recognize the person staring back. We all want to grab someone's arm in a hallway and ask, how do you do it? How do you make peace with the lie? And we all hope that someone will say back, I don't know either, but that's okay. Elvis Presley spent his whole life searching for authenticity. Dean Martin spent his whole life accepting its absence. Maybe neither of them was right. Maybe the truth is somewhere in between. In a Vegas hallway, in a trembling hand, in a confession that takes 26 years to repeat. A kid from Steubenville, Ohio, and a kid from Tupelo, Mississippi. 2 boys who conquered the world. 2 men who didn't conquer themselves. Today Elvis's 1969 Vegas jumpsuit sits in a glass case at Graceland. Millions visit every year to see the costume of the king. Dean Martin's apple juice glass was never saved, never displayed, never remembered. One man preserved his mask for eternity. The other man broke his glass and walked away. Both of them were looking for the same thing. Neither of them found it. But for 47 seconds, in an empty hallway they stopped pretending, and maybe that's the closest any of us get to being real.